All right, today we're going to be looking at the new Flair Pro 3, recently upgraded and relaunched from its predecessor, the Flair Pro 2. We're going to go over all the differences between those two models, exactly what got upgraded and what didn't. I'm going to tell you why I absolutely love manual espresso and how it also drives me a little bit crazy from time to time. We're going to make some espresso, of course, too, and then we're going to try and answer the question, who is this thing for? Before we get into the kind of good, bad, pro, con stuff, though, I think we should look at how exactly it works. It's pretty simple, really. It's got this arm here and this little brew chamber in here. You put the coffee in and then you compress the arm down, and then espresso will kind of come out of here into a little cup that's sitting on a little drip tray that's attached to this sort of base here. It also has this new shot mirror, which is very nice. That's an upgrade as well from the Pro 2, as well as all these little accessories and stuff. We'll go over all of that. Now, to make coffee with this thing, the first thing you need to do is you take this out here. This is the brewing chamber. We're going to take this pressure gauge attachment off and separate the top, which is called the group or the brew chamber, from the bottom, which is called the portafilter. And I'm going to push that little plate all the way to the back, and then I'm going to grab this thing right here. And this is one of the things that was added with the Flair Pro 3. And it's designed to make preheating this thing easier, which we are going to come back to that. Now I've got my kettle heated up to a full boil here, and I'm just going to drop the funnel into the kettle there. And then I'm going to take this brew chamber and I'm going to just let it sit in there. And as the kettle steams while I'm doing all my other business, in theory, it's going to heat that thing up. Now, to actually prep my shot, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this portafilter here and I'm going to put this thing on here, which is called a dosing funnel. Then I'm going to take my ground coffee here. I've ground up 18 grams of a light roast coffee. We're just going to dump it in there. Going to shake it around a little bit. You can do something called WDT if you want, if you're not feeling comfortable with how evenly things are distributed in there. And then I just like to give it a little tap just to knock things down. And then I'm going to give it a little tamp just like that. You don't have to go too hard, and then I'll just give it a little spin and I'll lift it out. The Flair also comes with this dosing cup, which you can use. It also kind of works for a tamp. It's not as nice as this tamp though. And also it comes with this little thinger here that can just clip onto the bottom there. And that prevents it from making, if things get a little messy from time to time, that'll keep things nicely clean in a little spout. Once your shot is prepared, we're going to take this little screen here and we're going to drop it on top of there just like that. Then we're going to take our nicely preheated brew chamber, put it on the top. Next, I'm going to put my scale under here just so I can keep an eye on things. And I'm going to put a cup under that. And then I'm just going to angle this mirror. I'm not going to be working at the best angle here, but just so that I can see what's happening under there. Then we're just going to take our kettle and fill up the group with boiling water. After that, we put our pressure gauge in here, and then we're just going to let it slip under the arm like this, and we're going to start forcing the arm down, and I'm just going to let it do a nice slow pre-infusion. And what that's going to do is that's going to let a lot of those grounds saturate a little bit better, prevent channeling, make for a bit more even pulling of a shot. Now, once I can see it's fully pre-infused and I have beading across the full basket, I'm going to push down on this, and I'm just going to press down until I have about twice my weight in pulled espresso. And that is 36 grams versus 18 grams of beans. Now let's see how this tastes. Now that is a really good shot, and this is going to highlight something that I really love about this type of espresso machine. This is a wash that's called Troso from Hatch Coffee, and it is edging definitely on the lighter roast, and I have never actually pulled it on the Flair before. And that is something that is pretty risky to do. And even if it didn't pull exactly how I wanted it, I could kind of adjust the pressure there as I was pushing it down to adjust for how it was actually coming out. And the result is actually really good. I'm getting a nice vibrant acidity there. It's kind of like a tart cherry or like rhubarb pie. That is a great shot of espresso. When you're all done, one thing that I like to do is put a purge cup underneath and just push out as much water as you can that's left in there. Then you take this off, pop your pressure gauge out, and head over to your sink or your compost and dump everything out. Be careful though not to throw that screen out accidentally. I've almost done that once or twice. After everything's washed and dried, just set it back to store. The very first espresso machine that I used was another manual lever called the Rock Presso, and I used that thing for a long time. And it was kind of during that period that the Flair sort of came to prominence and became the leading option in this kind of mid to entry level manual espresso machine. Now, I reviewed the Flair Pro 2, and of course it performed extremely well, beat my expectations. One of the things that I love about Flairs is there's this robust community of people around it who can jump in and help you start troubleshooting your shots. Flairs resources are also fantastic for learning how to make espresso. They have a range of machines, so if you want to do more, or if this machine costs too much, they have both lower and higher end options that honestly, you can do things on them that you can't even do on that machine back there. And that's the thing that I really love about Flairs and manual espresso in general. You are in complete control of your espresso shot. And if you've never done espresso, that can be a little bit intimidating, but in some ways it's also easier if you're just getting started. On an electric espresso machine like that, you prepare your puck and you put it in the machine, and then you push that go button. And then at that point, if things start to go sideways, there isn't actually a lot that you can do to save the process. On a machine like this, depending on how your shot is pulling, if it's going too slow, you can just let it pre-infuse for a little bit longer. Or if it's going too fast, you just ease up on your pressure. You can feel all of that happening and react to it in real time and salvage like 90% of your shots. It is pretty impressive. And through all that process, you're kind of internalizing and learning a lot of the fundamentals of what makes espresso machines work, so that by the time you're ready to move to another machine, you have more of this knowledge that is actually helpful in how espresso will pull under different sets of conditions. And for a lot of users, once they get to that point, they don't actually want to give up that functionality and that control that they have, so they just end up going with a Flair 58, and that's kind of what they end up using over the long term. Now, what I don't like about manual espresso is it's pretty tedious. If you're looking for convenience, speed, ease of use, workflow, it's gonna be somewhat lacking with a machine like this. You saw all the little bits and pieces that I had out that I had to keep track of. I had to do things in the right order. You do adapt to it over time, but at first you take it apart, you get all these pieces out on the counter and you go to make espresso, and it can be a little bit overwhelming. Cleanup too is a little tricky. You have all these little bits and pieces to clean, and then if you want to do 2 shots in a row, you have to bring all that stuff back, dry it. Some people even buy a whole extra portafilter and group to make the process of doing 2 shots in a row a little bit easier. You have preheating too to worry about. It's all just the kind of experience that you'll be huddled over your Flair, putting all the pieces together and doing the process, totally into it, and your spouse looks over at you and is like, is that actually worth it? All that work that you're doing? But then you have the cup of espresso, and it just feels very satisfying. So manual espresso, people have mixed opinions on it. All right, so let's talk about the Flair Pro 3 and what exactly they upgraded from the Flair Pro 2. Number one, you have this preheat funnel. And this is something that I actually really love that they included. You saw people trying to kind of do this without this funnel with the Pro 2, and this just makes the process way faster, way easier. There's also this magnetic detachable shot mirror. This is something we originally saw on the Flair 58, and I absolutely love that they have included this on the Flair Pro 3. It just makes that learning process way easier because you're not trying to, peek under there to see what's actually happening while you're putting pressure down on that arm. So that's a huge quality of life improvement from my perspective. Both the Flair Pro 3 and the Flair Pro 2 come with carrying cases, and the Flair Pro 3 case is actually a little larger, so for some people that might be a negative. The Flair Pro 2 case, it's got that slightly smaller footprint, but I found with that case, you do get the knack of it, but it just is not the most intuitive for whatever reason, trying to figure out how all the pieces are oriented in there. The case for the Flair Pro 3, it is refreshingly brainless. It's clear even looking at the case where everything is supposed to go. So I like that. Then there's this, the no preheat cylinder. And I was very skeptical about that because heat loss and preheating are some of the biggest challenges that come with manual espresso machines. You know, you have this big metal part and you put your water in, and intuitively you're just like, the temperature of that water is going to go way down as soon as it gets in that room temperature metal, and that can result in sour, under extracted espresso. The Flair Pro 2 had this very kind of elaborate preheating process with the silicone base that you would just sort of put the top part in, then fill that with boiling water while you were, you know, doing all the rest of your stuff. Then you would dump that out and put it together, put it on here, and then fill it up. Very time consuming, very tedious. The funniest thing for me about this, though, is Flair kind of says, hey, we're doing the Pro 3. We got this new no preheat cylinder with this version. Then in the next breath, they say, also, we have this new preheat funnel to make preheating a little easier. So anyways, I decided to test it. Number one, the new brew chamber up here is about 100 grams lighter than the last one. So even just feeling them in your hands, you can feel there's quite a difference here. I was really interested in how it was actually going to perform. So the first thing I did was I brewed on both Flairs at room temperature, and I filled them with hot water, stuck a little probe in there to see how much the temperature would drop. When I tested the Pro 2 with no preheat, I found that there was an initial temperature drop of like 18.5 degrees Celsius. Then if I let it sit in there for another minute, there was an additional drop of about 7 degrees Celsius, so quite the drop there. The Pro 3 with no preheat, it did still drop, but it dropped by less. There was an initial drop of about 15 degrees Celsius, and then if I left it in there for about another minute, it would drop by about another 5 degrees. So absolutely better performance in the Flair Pro 2. If you end up with one of these, that still is definitely enough of a drop where personally I'm gonna recommend, if you want the best results, you leverage this funnel that they've conveniently included for you and make preheating part of your process. Now, the next test that I was really curious to run actually was preheating the old one with that hot water fill and just letting boiling water kind of sit in there versus heating this one up with steam. And just intuitively, I was thinking like, this is not going to be as effective. So I did run the test. I preheated them both as I was kind of doing my puck preparation process. On the Pro 2 with that boil water preheat, I found there was an initial drop of about 8.5 degrees Celsius, so definitely a lot less than no preheat. And then over the next minute, about another drop of 5 degrees or so Celsius. Then I did the Flair Pro 3 with the steam preheat, and I found that that one dropped by only 7 degrees Celsius, and over the next minute it dropped less there as well, only getting an additional about 3 degrees cooler. So overall, surprising to me, better performance from a technical standpoint with the new chamber and the steam preheat compared to the old one, as well as a better and more streamed workflow in my opinion. So that was a very nice surprise. So we have great espresso, improved performance over the last one, as well as some quality of life improvements, you know, with the more convenient preheating, the shot mirror, all that is great. But what is not to love about this? There are a couple things. As I've already mentioned, the looks aren't totally for me. So, you know, I know that one's personal though. There are a lot of people out there that really like how the Flair looks. So I'm gonna leave that one up to personal preference. A bigger drawback for me is that workflow piece. You know, keeping track of all these bits and pieces, getting used to how they work, doing all the things in the right order, not losing anything, not accidentally throwing parts in the compost when you're cleaning up, and really internalizing that workflow. It is definitely a compromise. As I said, you do get into a bit of a rhythm with it, but it's complicated, you know, especially compared to some other brewing methods that are, in terms of what you have to keep track of anyways, a lot more simple. A big one, actually, if you are into like lattes or flat whites, that kind of thing, is, you know, this is manual, it's not electric, so there's no way to steam milk. If that is something where you're like,
yeah, espresso machine, cheap, $325, lattes every day.
You're gonna need a way to froth that milk, whether that's like a Starbucks canister foamer or a subminimal nano foamer, or you could go up to something like a Bellman stovetop steamer as well. All of those options technically work, but they are taking an already somewhat tedious workflow and making it even more complicated, let alone if you want to do more than one drink in a row. For espresso and Americano, it's fantastic. You have the nice portable cases, but because of all those little parts, and you even actually need to disassemble it with tools to even fully get it back into that case, for me, it's not the type of thing where I'm gonna throw it into that case and travel with it on a regular basis. I'm gonna leave it set up at my house and not really cart it around with me too much. I know there are people who do that, and if you're one of them, I applaud you. Not totally for me. But as far as it goes, if you're okay with that relatively small list of things, then this could be a fantastic fit for you. And even with those compromises, you know, this thing costs $325. It is hard to get any espresso machine that can perform even just consistently for that price. This is going to open the doors for you to a whole new world of really high quality espresso. Yes, it's a little bit more fuss, but everything is going to have its compromises. So the question is, who exactly is this thing for? I get asked pretty regularly by friends and family, you know, oh, I'd love to have an espresso machine at home. I like that idea. And I always tell them, you know, unless you're also willing to pick up another hobby, maybe stick to, you know, a drip machine, because it's more complicated. And if you're game for that, then you can have some really fantastic coffee for a very low price. It can also be more hassle than people are necessarily looking for. I think for this machine, you really need to love the process of making coffee to get the most out of it. Also, if you're a milk drink crazy person, I would say this could work for you, but go in with your eyes open. If you want just espresso or Americanos, could be a fantastic fit. If travel is your thing, I would say it can work again, but maybe some better options out there. And if it's too much at the price of $325, I would say consider the Flair Neo Flex. It does also have the little bit smaller than standard portafilter. So if you want a wider range of accessories and you have a little bit more budget, then you could consider going up to the Flair 58. If this is in your budget sweet spot, you are excited to get into the world of espresso, you like the flexibility and all the profiling options that you can get to really dial in shots in some pretty unique ways, this machine and machines like it are pretty hard to beat for the price. If this video was helpful, I would love for you to subscribe to my channel. It's honestly the best way that you can support me doing this and making more of these videos. And I'd like to know what you think of the Flair Pro 3. Is this fantastic, or maybe is this the upgrade that nobody was asking for? I'd love to hear your thoughts either way in the comments. I hope your next cup of coffee is fantastic, and we'll see you next time.